Let's meet our fantastic panel first up. This is a really important topic tonight. There's so much to talk about, stemming from this wonderful book, Black and Proud. But let's meet our panel first. On my far left is Gary Osmond. He is a senior lecturer in sport history in the School of Human Movement Studies, the University of Queensland. His research interests include race and sport with a focus on Indigenous Australians and Pacific Islanders. And he's the co-author of this terrific book, Black and Proud. I'm feeling like Jennifer Byrne. Sean Gorman, in the middle, the lovely Sean Gorman, is the author of two books, Brother Boys, the story of Jim and Philip Cracker, and Legends, the AFL Indigenous team of the century. Brother Boys was adapted for theatre and had a national tour. Sean is a senior research fellow at Curtin University and the lead chief investigator of an Australian Research Council project reviewing the AFL's vilification policy. I look forward to talking about that. And that is all very worthy and wonderful, but perhaps the most important thing about Sean is that he's a member of the Almanacery, like my good self. And for those who don't know, this means he contributes to the Footy Almanac, a wonderful publication edited by John Harms and Paul Daffy. So, Sean, welcome to you. And finally, Gilbert McAdam, who had a highly successful AFL career with St Kilda and later the Brisbane Bears. He's the first and to this day the only Indigenous player to have won the Magarey medal in South Australia's SANFL competition. Gilbert currently works with the Academy of Sport, Health and Education in Shepparton as a Sports and Personal Development Officer, and we all know him as one of the affable hosts of the Marngrook Footy Show, a footy show that we can all watch and enjoy without getting offended. So, welcome to you, gentlemen. The year was 1993, and as an Adelaide Crows fan, it's a year that I try not to think too much about, because for those who don't follow my team as closely as I do, we were knocked out of the preliminary final despite leading by 42 points at half-time. So I've kind of wiped 93 from my mind, except for this wonderful moment in Australia's history, where Nicky Winmar lifted up his jumper, pointed to his chest and said he was, declared he was black and proud to be black. I want to start with a question to all of you about your recollections of that particular day in 1993, and perhaps, Gilbert, you were the closest to the action. I can't remember you playing AFL, sure. No. Gilbert, tell us about your recollections of that.
Yeah, look, like I said last year, obviously we went to Vic Park. It was the first time that I've actually ever played at Victoria Park, and I heard so many stories about it, and it was actually something I was looking forward to, because when I used to play, it didn't matter where I played, didn't matter who I played, I always looked forward to a challenge. And you know, we had some battles against Collingwood before that actual game. Mm-hmm. You know, the previous couple of years we had some battles, and a bit more than battles, you know, it was a battle inside of a battle, I suppose. And yeah, it just sort of led up to that game, and basically had a half-time back in 93 when we had the reserves playing. We don't have the reserves anymore, and the reserves would play before us at half-time of the game. And at the Collingwood Victoria Park, when you walk out of the change rooms for the visiting side, you walk straight out basically the cheer squad. So as soon as you walk through the race, bang, they basically in your face straight away. So they started on me and Nicky straight away at half time, because at half time back in them days, you'd go out to the oval, you'd check the conditions, you'd roll the ball on the ground, you'd throw it in the air, you'd work everything out before you actually played the game, and that was just. That's a skill in itself, I reckon, and you learn little traits about that. So we done that, and basically they just gave it to us straight away, and it never let up from there.
What were they saying? Oh, look,
I think I might have said a few things before. I don't like to go into too much detail, but you know, they were pretty nasty stuff they were saying, and you know, a few people have asked me about I've had a lot of people over the years have come up and said to me, if somebody calls you a black sea, do you mind that? And I actually said, I don't mind that. That's okay. If you call me a black sea, I don't have a problem with that. But when you start saying, no, you should be hung like the rest of them, and you start getting into a bit more deep waters, that's when it starts to hit a bit of a nerve. So, I took a lot, because I played a lot of footy in Adelaide before I come over. So it's something that I've dealt with basically all my life.
Yes. Well, we'll get on to how widespread it is in a moment, but did you get a sense walking out at half-time during that reserves match, did you get a sense that Nicky Winmar had enough and that this was brewing and he couldn't take it anymore, or were you surprised by his action?
I wasn't surprised. Like I said, there was 2 years lead up to that game, and a lot of people don't understand that. They give it to us plenty of times before that game, and I think because it was our big park and because Nicky actually pulled his Guernsey up and there was a photo taken, people actually stood up and took notice. Whereas before, when you're in an environment, when you're part of a team, it's not always about yourself. And you've got to consider other people's feelings as well as my own feelings. And that's the sort of person I am. And, if there was something negative towards me, I had to look at a big picture. It's not just about me. I've got to think about my teammates. How's it going to affect the team? How's it going to affect us playing the following week? It sounds all diplomatic, doesn't it? But sometimes you have to have a bit of steel and you have to make a point. And me probably being the younger statesman, I always thought that Nick was always better than me. He flew the flag longer than I did. I was proud that he actually did that day. So I'm glad I didn't do it. I preferred him to do it because he'd been around a lot longer than I have, and he would have copped it a lot more than I have.
Yeah. Sean?
To be honest, the actual day itself for me is something I don't actually recall. In '93, I actually still would have actually been playing D-grade amateurs for the Melville Rams in Perth, and whilst I, not having gotten to the wonderful heights that Gilbert and Nicky played at, and I suppose football for me has been something that pervades virtually everything that I do, the way that I think, the way that I interact with people, so on and so forth. For me, 1993 was a significant year because in '92 I took a year off from working. I'd been working in shearing teams and on farms for about 5 years, and went back and did my year 12 again because I realised I was working with a bunch of knuckleheads. So basically I went back and did my year 12. I didn't know what I was going to do at the end of it. I read one book and realised I was going to do a degree in Indigenous Studies the following year at Murdoch University, which was the first time a degree in that was ever actually offered by any university in Australia. So 93 for me, coming into that program, doing that type of work, looking at a whole range of Indigenous issues, culminated with Nicky Winmar doing that. It also was when Mabo became legislation. It was the International Year of the Indigenous Person. It was the year Gavin Wanganeen was the first Indigenous player to win a Brownlow. Michael Long was the won a Norm Smith medal. There was so much going on in that space. So to be able to come into that as a Wadjala, as a white fella, coming into that space and starting to learn about these sorts of things, where I was able to try and then slowly filter a number of those major historical moments through things like Nicky's stance. And if I could just, and I know this is ostensibly about the wonderful book that Matthew and Gary have done, which is just a fantastic testament to their strength and their tenacity, because they had a lot of resistance from a lot of publishers about a whole range of these sorts of things. So the fact that they stuck with it, they really need to be applauded for it. But this is the way I remember it from my book Legends, which I've been told makes an excellent Valentine's Day gift. I've been told, okay?
Yeah, I'm still waiting for mine, Sean.
No worries, Uncle. I'll get it to you. Perhaps the reason we still talk about what Nicky Winmar did that day is because it cannot be defined or explained simply. It is both a delicately poignant moment and a statement of significant power. It can be seen in two possible ways. It is either Nicky Winmar's most public-private moment or his most private-public moment. Either way, the action is historic, one which will be remembered as thrilling, brave and significant, and that's why 20-odd years after the actual moment, we're still talking about it, we're still referring to it today.
Gary? Gary, well, perhaps before you talk about your recollections, Sean has touched on how difficult it was to get a publisher. Perhaps describe to us how difficult it was. Where was the resistance coming from and how strong was it?
There was a sense initially that perhaps the topic had been dealt with very broadly already. There had also been a recent book by New South about the history of Indigenous Australians through photographs, which is an excellent book by Jane Lydon. And then when we did eventually shop around and found a publisher, there was some difference of vision over the way the story might be told. But in the end, New South had faith in this project. And I think it helped that we were able to spend a lot of time with people like Gilbert and with Nicky himself and get that story and position the story the way we did.
Were you captivated by it when it happened in 93?
In 93, I was still a fairly green migrant to Australia from Canada, and I was on a steep learning curve for all things Australian. And to be honest, footy was probably one of the more bizarre things, like most Australian sports, about Australia. So I was in a footy tipping competition in my office, but I didn't have a clue what I was doing.
People like you normally do very well in tipping.
But I have racked my brain over this incident, and I can't honestly say I remember the day or remember the next day when the photos were published. But I do remember, and this is significant for the story, I do remember the ways that image was reproduced in many forms in many places over the years. So it's graced, it's been graffiti in laneways here in Melbourne, it's graced book covers, it's been all over newspapers, magazines, lots of artists have worked with it, and that made a deep impression on both me and Matthew. And we decided that even though it was a very well-known image, an iconic image even, and we use it in our teaching, we both teach sport history at universities, people recognized it, but not many people knew the actual story. And we felt that the whole incident risked kind of disappearing behind the photo. The photo would stand and be reproduced and transformed, and we wanted to know a bit more about the photo and the backstory.
And the photo almost didn't turn up on the front page of the Sunday Age. Perhaps share with the audience the fight that the photographer and the journalist had on their hands.
Yeah, look, this is a really fascinating story. As Gilbert mentioned, Nicky did this gesture at the very end of the game when all the TV cameras had been turned off, when most of the press photographers were eating pies and not paying attention, but two photographers, and I'm going to mention them by name, Wayne Ludby and John Feder from the Sunday Age and the Herald Sun, were alert to issues of racism in the game. They'd been photographing football for a number of years and were well aware of these issues. And they had a sense that something could happen because of the electricity during that match. So they kept their cameras ready. So when Nicky did what he did, they were there. And they captured a photo each, and they went back to their editors with a strong sense of the meaning. Ludby had heard Winmar say, "I'm black and I'm proud to be black." And they had a job to convince their editors that this was A, important, B, deserved to go on the front page, and C, most importantly, was a race story. This was a protest gesture. And they both succeeded, to their credit, in having that picture published on the front page of the papers. But with different captions, and that's an interesting story we cover in the book.
What were the different captions?
Well, Wayne Ludby and the footy editor at the Sunday Age, Nick Place, were able to caption this picture as a racial protest. And Nick Place wrote an accompanying article that described what had happened and why Winmar did what he did. Whereas the Sunday Herald Sun had two headlines, a morning edition and a late edition. And the first, or I may have the order back to front, but one was, "We won with determination." And the other one was, aren't we good? Aren't I good? They ignored the racial angle. And Stuart Littlemore on Media Watch picked it up in the following week and said this is clearly an issue about race. And within a week or two, the Herald Sun sent two non-sport journalists out to a game to gauge for themselves the level of racism. And what they wrote was quite shocking. And it's actually one of the more lurid accounts of racism in the sport that came in that period.
Gilbert, you spoke about the 2 years leading up to that moment. In 1991, Tony Shaw, Collingwood captain, said to Caroline Wilson, "I'd make a racist comment every week if I thought it would help win the game." Was this a problem confined to Collingwood or certain clubs, or was it more widespread than that?
Oh, look, back when I started in the early 90s, there was racism in AFL at the time. Well, I don't know if you say it VFL at the time or AFL. Well, it was AFL because that's when the Crows actually come into it. The first time I came to the AFL, racism in sport, I copped it straight away. Not just from Collingwood, from other sides as well. So it was part of it. But when I played, everything had to be hush hush all the time, because like I said, I'm playing in a team sport. So when I'm playing in a team sport, it's not just about me; it's about my teammates and stuff. And you know, when the coach comes up to you and says, "We don't really want to talk about it, or we don't really want to go to the media about it because he wants to worry about this week's game," what do? As an individual in a team sport, I've got to listen to the coach. I've got to listen to everybody else. So I had to bite my tongue a few times. And, you know, I'm not normally a person that does that. If I want to say something, I'll say it. And I don't care if it's me coach or what. I'll say it. If I believe that morally it's wrong, and that's why I've been brought up, I'll say it. But because the pressure of playing an AFL game and in an AFL team, sometimes you just don't say it because you just don't. And that's just how it is.
So given that pressure is coming from the top, from the coach and from the hierarchy at a club, what was the club's response to Winmar's gesture?
Well, I got a phone call straight away from Caroline Wilson from The Age, the day after the game. Now, I didn't ring her back. She rang me again on Monday. She got me at work. She really wanted to do a story. And I really wanted to do a story with her, but I just said to her, look, I can't do this story because the club basically have told me that we've just got to move on, because we had Carlton the following week. So just because we beat Collingwood, well, you know what it's like playing Collingwood and Carlton. Well, straight away Sunday, my thoughts were with Carlton. It's not about the day before. For everybody else it is, because it's just made big headlines like Gary's saying. So everybody wanted a piece of me on Sunday, everyone wanted a piece of me on the Monday. I had a meeting with the club. They just said, look, we just got to let this slide. That's what happened.
So did it totally slide, Sean, or how did you see St Kilda's reaction to it and the wider community's response?
It's interesting talking to people now in terms of what's actually happened and what it actually meant. I think it means a whole range of things to a whole range of different people, and I think that's a perfectly normal response to these particular things. The thing when I was at Melbourne Uni, I ran an Indigenous Histories and Sport unit, and we would constantly go back to this image. Constantly go back to it, and we would unpack it and repack it and sort of like really use it as a touchstone in many respects. And I would always come back to this point, well, what is Nicky Winmar responding to? What is he rejoinding to? Think of it as a conversation. Is he being called a weak C? Is he being called someone who should just, toughen up a bit? No, he's actually being abused for his colour. And that is basically what he is rejoinding to. He's replying to this. Yeah. For me, the reason why the image is so important is because it is saying a whole range of these things. It is saying, I'm black and I'm proud, I'm tough, and I can put up with it and all the rest of it. And as I said in my book on the Crackers, to me, the reason why this is such an important thing is because what Nicky Winmar is actually saying in this particular photograph is you cannot ignore me anymore. You have to deal with me on my terms and get over my blackness, because I'm not going to, get a Michael Jackson kind of style sort of, thing going. I can't change. Gilbert can't change. So the thing is, you have to deal with me as I am, as I come to you. And this, once you look into Indigenous history and Indigenous, non-Indigenous relations from 1788, you realise that Australians have a great difficulty in doing that. And that's where, for me, the use of sport, particularly football, is the trick in order for people to arrive at some better place. Yeah?
So, as a player that played in those times, we used to ring each other up. Me and Michael McLean, Michael Long, Chris Lewis, Derek Kickett at Sydney. We used to ring each other up and we used to talk about it amongst ourselves. And we used to say, oh, we can't keep putting up with this, we can't keep doing it.
And were those players from other teams also being told to not whinge and complain about it?
Well, you just didn't do it because that was just part of the package back then. You just didn't do it because, I don't know, clubs just don't want a bar of it. AFL probably didn't want a bar of it at the time. So it made people stand up and listen.
Well, this forced the AFL to act, didn't it?
That's
Perhaps more slowly than it should have. But were you, Gary, satisfied with the AFL's response and what followed it?
I think it's probably more important to ask how players like Gilbert responded to the AFL. I mean, the AFL immediately said they condemn racism in the sport, but what they missed there was that, and this is what Gilbert's alluding to here, racism was a deeply entrenched part of the culture. And this is not from personal experience, obviously, but this is from the research. This is something that was accepted. You know, you either turned the other cheek or you fought back, but there was no way through this. And what it did was it forced the AFL to confront this. It took them some time. They're still dealing with it. But it did start a conversation.
When the incident with Michael Long and Damien Monkhurst come along, that was the last straw.
Yeah.
After that incident, on the Monday we spoke to the AFL. We had a teleconference with the AFL. Derek Kicker was in Sydney, Louis was in Perth, me and Magic was in Brisbane, Chris Johnson was in Melbourne. We had a teleconference with the AFL and we said, that's it, enough's enough now. That's when they brought in the new rule, the racial vilification.
Rule 30, which is now Rule 35.
Yes. And we'll get on to that shortly. So this act came to symbolise change and it made people assess their own prejudices, and it was a defining moment in sport. What about outside of sport? At the time, Senator Nick Bolkus weighed into it. I think he was in Canberra at a UN conference. Gary, you can help me out there. Were the reverberations felt in the nation's capital and outside of footy?
Well, there's a couple of factors here. So this was a United Nations conference that was being held in Sydney, and he could easily have ignored this issue, but he used it as a speaking point. So the very day after the game, Nick Bolkus spoke to this and said this is an example of what we need to change in this country if we want to mature, if we want to develop. But 1993 was also the year of the International Year of Indigenous Peoples. Keating had not long before given his Redfern speech. Right, so Keating was another champion. Paul Keating, the Prime Minister, another champion of this. So there was a political interest and willingness to confront this, and that added to the pressure on sport.
From that meeting, I actually got employed by the AFL. So I was I was promoting and developing the game, but I was also an advisor for the racial vilification as well. So I went on to work for the AFL for 10 years after that. So, you know, a bit of good come out of it.
And and in that role, were you speaking to kids
I
well?
went through the whole of Victoria, just about every school in Victoria. Basically went through every school in Brisbane, went to every school in the Northern Territory, WA, Queensland. I've basically done a lot of work for AFL, and that's what come out of it.
All right, Sean, as the expert on the AFL's racial vilification policy, from that moment, what happened? And it's evolved, as you alluded to. Is it in a good place, the policy?
Yeah, look, we've just finished all the data gathering over the last, 2.5 years with regards to that Australian Research Council grant to look at Rule 30 and to see what the efficacy has been like in terms of the induction and the programs and all the education that the players get. And look, the AFL are constantly they tinker with the rules of the game, yes, but they're also tinkering and changing in quite a large whole scale way, actually, with regards to those those particular rules. So issues around the Justin Sherman incident that happened with Joel Wilkinson a few years ago, that came in, that happened right in the middle of one of our major incursions, our research incursions, which for us was perfect timing, but probably for the AFL and their brand wasn't so great, but it was perfect for us. So we actually would ask that question. So to the 400 odd players that we did speak to a man, all of them said that whatever Justin Sherman did was either really stupid or ignorant, and they felt embarrassed to be a player, or they felt really angry towards him as a player for what it is that he had done, because they felt the amount of work that the AFL have done to get people up to speed on this particular issue had been sufficient. And not only had he done it once, he'd done it twice in the same game. So, and being at the AFL the other day, I actually saw a little video that Joel Wilkinson has done in terms of that, and basically it made him feel diminished as a person. Similarly to the ways that Adam Goods said that he felt like he didn't want to be there out in the game. Now this is a champion of our game who didn't want to be playing in a major Indigenous round match because of something a 13-year-old girl had said to him. One single word. Yeah. So in terms of those things, the AFL have gotten better. The players understand what they are not allowed to do and the reasons for it. They get those sorts of things. It's issues around, once again, those issues of casual racism, which has been sort of, the catch cry now after the Eddie Maguire King Kong issue and all those sorts of things. And one of the players actually said it to me in a different way. He goes, well, we know we're not allowed to say these sorts of words. Regardless, we can't, pick someone up on their religion, what they look like, even if they've got a speech impediment. Yeah, they're not allowed to do that, right? And that's part of the condition of being a professional sports person. Some people might think, oh, well, that's a little bit crazy, but that's part of the condition of being a professional in that environment, in that professional elite environment. One of the players said, well, how does it work when we're actually, in the gym working out and there's a bunch of gangster rap on the stereo booming out, which every second word is nigger? And I said, well, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought of that.
That wouldn't happen in my time.
No. And
see, I'll tell you now, it wouldn't have got played because it would have been pulled up very quickly.
So isn't it interesting in terms of that, how far we've come, but how far we possibly haven't come in terms of those things, Gilbert. So it's really interesting how, in terms of those professional environments, not just out and playing, but in terms of, those other spaces where you're interacting with people from all sorts of different social and cultural backgrounds, what is permissible and what is not. So these are some of the things as part of the recommendations, and I can't speak any more about it because ethically I'm bound not to, and I'll probably get an email from Andrew Demetriou saying you shouldn't be doing that, Sean. So that's an example of that.
I've had teammates say the word Abbo. I've had to pull them up and say, you don't say that word. Oh, why? It's okay, isn't it? It's short for Aboriginal, isn't it? And I said, no. I said, where I come from, you'd be on the ground quicker than 2 seconds where I come from if you say that word. So I had to educate my own teammates, not just St Kilda, but Brisbane as well. So, and that's where the player can play a big role. They can pull them up. In some cases, some Aboriginal players are scared to say it because they're scared to say it.
Still today?
Yeah, even today, and because they don't know how to say it. Me, just so everybody understands where I'm coming from, my father's a stolen generation. He got taken away in Western Australia, got taken to a place called Beagle Bay outside of Broome. So when I talk about racism, I'm coming from real deep. So I'm not coming from Adam Goods or the new modern day footballers today. I'm born in 1967, the year we got to vote, So I'm coming from a very deep racism, what happened to my father. So I challenge people when I'm not happy about what they say. So I'm probably a bit different to the modern day footballers where, thanks to us, they haven't had to put up with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a great line. Trent Dolby wrote a profile last month in The Australian about Adam Goodes, and he talked about the moment last May when he called the teenager on racism. And he had this beautiful line that applies equally to Winmar, and it was, this took 19 seconds to unfold, the gesture, but 200 years to arise. And I think that's a really important point in understanding reactions of Indigenous players, not just Winmar on that day, but why these words have the impact they do,
Can I just slightly add to that? I've had a number of conversations with people since that Adam Goodes incident, and I've had a number of those people say there's nothing wrong with saying the word ape. And I've sort of done what Gilbert has done in a different way. I said, rightio, we'll go and hop in the car, because I live in Perth. I said, we'll drive down to downtown Willagee, which has got a highly visible Noongar population. And you go up to anyone and see how you go. And they block up pretty quickly. Yeah? So that's the meaning of it. Sitting around a barbecue with a whole bunch of other white fellas saying, well, I don't think this and I don't think that. Change it up a bit. Yeah? Go somewhere where there are people who that type of language actually means something to them. And as Gilbert said, it comes from a very deep, deep space. Yeah? So we've got to be mindful of those particular things.
So we had people on Talkback Radio saying, Adam Goodes, you've got to, toughen up and not be so soft. Where does that come from, that ignorance? Is it not being taught in schools? Do kids not get taught Indigenous history? Why would they think that the term ape is acceptable?
I don't know if I'm out of line here, but I just want to let people know, with Adam Goodes, he comes from the Flinders, the Flinders Ranges in Adelaide? Beautiful country, beautiful mountains. Now, I believe that his people, traditionally they were called rock people. Now, I haven't even actually had a word to Adam about it, so the next time I speak to Adam about it, I want to ask him why he got so offended. Now, I believe, because they were rock people, he was basically saying rock ape when Eddie said it. So, I don't know, that's just my opinion. I haven't said this to too many people, but I know, culturally, Adam Goodes' mob from the Flinders Ranges, they were called rock people. So it's very close to being an ape, isn't it? So you wonder why he would have got emotional about it when Eddie said it. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about being an ape, it's about being a rock ape or in the rocks, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But why? I mean, if it wasn't understood by many people, how can we fix that? And is it to do with education at that young age? Is that history not being taught? Either of you know?
Go ahead.
Look, I've done a fair bit of work around that educational space, particularly in primary and high school and these sorts of things. And once again, having run those particular Indigenous sports history units, it's still amazing. Like even the brightest of the bright that have come in as undergraduates. To a space like Melbourne University, it is amazing just how little they know. And for many of them, that's the driver for them to take up doing a subject like that in the first place and wanting to know more and these sorts of things. And I think it's just a general sort of, general lack of empathy around these particular issues. And you've just got to listen to, and I don't do it often because it just depresses me, but like listening to things like Talkback Radio or looking at the letters to the editor in the Australian or whatever it might be, in order to gauge what goes on. And coming from a working class Catholic family and having a number of family members who still hold those bad views, it's very much a part of the ways that I engage with my everyday, and I think there's just a general lack of empathy around these particular issues at school level. Yes, it is taught, but it's probably not taught in a way which enables them to empathise and to seek out more information on these issues. So that's the reason why we are constantly having these sorts of discussions around things like Nicky Winmar stuff, Adam Goodes, King Kong, Eddie Maguire, the whole box and dice. We don't seem to kind of get it, and we've got a bit more work to do around those particular things on all sort of levels. And when we have elections, we never hear about Indigenous issues ever. And we start to think, well, why is that? Why is that the case?
Because we're a minority.
Exactly. Well, I'm sorry. I was speaking rhetorically too, Gilbert. But in terms of that, that's exactly right. A minority. But this is an absolutely wonderful culture. And if you just engage with it a little bit, you see how beneficial it is. We can see how beneficial it is having Indigenous people playing sport at an elite level in terms of this. And when we compare that with, say, cricket. There's only been one Test cricketer, of Indigenous descent to play at that Test level, and that shocks a lot of people because they don't know it. They just assume that it's not the case. But it's those institutional things we've got to get better at, I think. We've been lagging on when we compare against, like, say, New Zealand, for argument's sake.
Yeah. I think really there's a great need for an ongoing, constant discussion about this. It's not just curriculum. It's not just teachers. Teachers are doing a fine job with this. We talked about casual racism before. This is all around. Kids are getting messages from their families, their communities, from the media. So at the university, I teach a large first-year class. Many of the students know chapter and verse incidents of Australian history. They know the broad picture of what's happened, but there's still some resistance to discussing this as a problem, to seeing it as a problem. So the discussion hasn't gone deep enough.
I reckon a lot of non-Aboriginal people, it's always about resistance, because that's what it was back then. Now, I'm a big believer that if Aboriginal law and Aboriginal law of the land still exists today in 2014, right? People go out bush and they still do initiations, and they still do walkabout, and they still do the Dreamtime stories, all right? Now, if non-Aboriginal people and all of you 200 people here tonight could have an understanding of that, your attitudes will change. But you know what? You're not going to get an understanding of it. Because you know why? Because it's all sacred. And I reckon that's half the trouble with black and white issues, is that we can't tell white people our culture. Because if we do that, we'll get something bad will happen to us or to my kids. So it's that sacred. Everything's all it's very sacred. The only way you get to know that is if you go out and do it. I've got two brothers who have been through it. My older brother Greg and my younger brother Adrian, who played at Collingwood, who also went through racism. But how can we educate white people when we really can't really say it? Does anyone understand my point? And you know what? That's going to happen till the day I go to my grave. Because at the end of the day, you're not allowed to tell anyone unless you go through it yourself. That's half the problem with us Aboriginal people, is that we can't share that information with non-Aboriginal people. And if we did, you will respect us more, because you'll have a lot more understanding. Because we have doctors like you people who fix you up. We have so many different things, exactly like you non-Aboriginal people have got. But you know what? You don't see it. And you're not allowed to see it. Only people who've been through the land of the law.
We spoke about casual racism, and a major element of that is humour, and it seems to be more acceptable in some quarters that if it's a joke, it's all right. I was just joking around. Eddie's defence springs to mind, sadly. I get so upset with ethnic stereotyping, and in my case it's more to do with the whole wog boy thing, I find it incredibly boring and limiting as a Greek woman. How do we go about addressing those sorts of stereotypes which the media perpetuates? I know it's a big question, but the media has to accept a lot of responsibility here.
I think it is. It's the stereotype is the hardest thing to try and challenge or to engage with, because the ways that we determine who we are is what it is that we are not. Yeah, so the ways that we can simplify information is by the stereotype. The woman driver, the Asian driver, whatever it might be, the Aboriginal footballer, the footballer generally. And it's, you can just think of these things. And I think it's not until you choose to engage with those particular things and start to, I suppose, try to unpack what a stereotype actually is. And when we come down to things like jokes and all the rest of it, we have to ask ourselves a very simple question: what are we laughing at? What is it that we're actually laughing at? And what's funny about it? probably not much is funny about it at all, actually. It's a ways for me to feel better. It goes back to that Joel Wilkinson thing when he said he was, vilified by Justin Sherman. He felt that Justin Sherman simply wanted to feel superior to him. So it's the ways that we feel better about ourselves at the expense of someone else. And they're very hard things to try and engage with. And as you rightly point out, Angela, the media have got so much to do with it. And I know they're a whipping boy, and I know that it's so easy to go to that default position about the media. But it's like when we pick up the footy news on the back of the page, or we listen, particularly when we listen to the radio. I find, and that constantly refer to Indigenous players either as boys or they, the instinct. It's in the blood, and all these sorts of simple sort of things to explain away a whole range of different things. And it's not, I suppose, until we hit the pause button on that for ourselves personally to say, well, what is actually going on here? Can we get better at it? So when our kids do it, or when someone close to us does it, we pull them up and say, no, look, I think you're slightly, off course here. Had you thought about it in these terms? Or something like that. So the onus is on us all as individuals in order to get these things right, and not simply playing to simple things, which at the end of the day are very flimsy.
Mm-hmm. We'll open up the floor to questions in just a minute, but Gary, the final word to you. How far have we come in addressing racism in sport, and in particular football? I mean, the events of last year would suggest we've still got a little way to go, but for someone who looks at it very closely, how far have we come?
Yeah, I think in the wake of Winmar's gesture and in the wake of Rule 30 in 1995, we saw a huge number, a really disappointing number of racist incidents. So to see it happen again with Goods last year was very disappointing. But the other perspective on that is it started the conversation. It was very different this time than it was 21 years ago. This time very few people had a go at Goods in the way that they had a go at Winmar in 1993. A colleague of mine at the University of Queensland, who's an Indigenous woman, an academic, we were talking about this the other day, and she pointed out something which I thought was kind of neat. She said, when Winmar did it, he pointed inwards. He had to point to himself. Goods pointed out, this is your responsibility. This was her take on this. And I think symbolically that's quite loaded. He was able to point back, in this case to one tormentor, but to the broader community to say, this is beyond me. This is your problem now. Mm-hmm. And people have discussed it. He's had a lot of support. Both events, though, did polarise the community. Yes.
And that's perhaps a reflection of how far we've got to go.
But I think if we come back to Gilbert's point about the complexity of race and racism, it's very difficult, obviously, with the long history we've had to deal with these issues, and certainly to clear them up overnight. But highly symbolic and iconic moments like Winmar's, to come back to Winmar, in 1993 are very powerful because they do arrest our attention. That was a particularly poignant and in many ways a beautiful stance and picture. And Goods' gesture last year was similar. So, there's no way of dealing with this quickly, but those moments help crystallize attention, help focus attention. And they're really effective, I think, in that's why we're here tonight.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, let's hear from the audience now. Questions? One down the front. Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm wondering to what extent did the incident at the Olympics, I think it was in Mexico City in 1972, when 3 African-American track and field players won the gold, silver, and bronze medals.
Tommy Smith, is that what you're referring to?
There was actually an Australian that was third. There was 2
Peter
American
Norman.
and 1 Australian.
Right.
Yeah.
But yes, go on.
Okay, they raised,
Yes.
Black Power,
yeah.
So was Nicky Winmar inspired by that, or?
Well, I've been quoted as saying that's the closest thing that I've seen to that, and I put Nicky's gesture in that same category. I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, but that's just my opinion.
Well, when we spoke to Winmar for the book, he did refer to that incident. So his was in some ways a spontaneous gesture. He and Gilbert, as Gilbert said, decided on that day before the game that something had to be done. But Nicky didn't know exactly what he was going to do. But he was fully aware of that incident, which happened in 1968. You're right, in Mexico City, so quite a long time ago now. And the that's had echoes around the country for the last 45 years. Very important moment. And can I just say the other motivation that Matthew and I had to write this book was we had an understanding from our research that there have been lots of moments like this, perhaps not moments that have been as poignant as Winmar's, but lots of highly significant moments in the history of race and sport in Australia that may have made the front pages, may have been discussed for a while, but then kind of disappeared. People have forgotten them. And we felt that there was a danger that this incident could go the same way. People might recognise the image but not really understand its context. And that was the point of the book, really, to kind of focus attention on this and say this isn't just a single moment 21 years ago. This has a long back history, a very personal history, and lasting significance.
I think that can take away the violence of it as well, because I know players before me, I know they got whacked and because they said something, the wrong thing. And when we were playing, well, we don't want it to get to that stage, do we? You know what I mean? You've got to draw the line. So, yeah, you don't want to go hitting someone, otherwise you get 5 games for hitting someone. I know players, former players, who have had incidents, I'm not going to mention names, where the players that they hit missed 4 or 5 games with a broken jaw and stuff like that. Yeah. And you don't want it to come to that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Jimmy Cracker had basically after, because that's how Jimmy would react. He wasn't interested in some philosophical discussion about why you called him a name. Jimmy would punch you in the face. And basically Jimmy got, 23 games all up through his career. That's an entire season. Gone. Like that. And... he's mellowed a lot now, James Gordon Cracker, but he's still, that's how he would react to those particular things.
Yeah, that's right.
And Winmar himself was suspended, I believe, for 10 games one season for an incident with Dermot Brereton,
that's right.
which, it took years for the story to come out. But really, he was reacting to abuse from Brereton, and Brereton's admitted that, but not at the time.
Yeah. Question?
Thanks very much, everyone. I thoroughly enjoyed it. My name is Ryan Rosario. Can I just ask you something about... I was thinking about the Muhammad Ali incident also, when he, I suppose, repeated his particular winning of the Olympic thing. Now, was it easier for him? And it's a bit like what Gilbert said, as part of a team, whereas in his case, being a solo boxer, was that what made it easier as a single person rather than being part of a team to have that sort
to make a stance.
To make a stance, yes.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're spot on. But don't forget, he's Muhammad Ali. Mate, I'll tell you what, he's way above what I'll ever be. But no, look, that's right. That's a very good point. He's an individual, so he can make an impact on people because he's the number 1 boxer in the world. He's number 1. No one can beat him. So he's got powerful. Whatever he says, people are going to listen and take notice, and that's how he dealt with it. So he could do it more as an individual.
Nicky wasn't comfortable talking about this after it happened.
Yeah.
He's more comfortable now. Am I correct in saying that? Because he came out for the launch of the Indigenous round last season. What can you share with us about that?
That's just us being who we are. Yeah. We don't want to talk about it because we just want to move on and forget about it. But sometimes you can't just forget about it. You got to say it, make it. And I know Nick's a lot more comfortable with it now than what he previously was because he's a lot more of an emotional person than what I am. And because I've seen him and I know what he's like when he gets emotional. It's just different.
I want to ask a question about Adam Goodes. He's this remarkable Australian, Indigenous Australian, who's just been crowned Australian of the Year. Gilbert, I'm a sports journal. I work with one of Melbourne's radio networks. I interviewed Adam last week. Yeah. Just to hear the passion and the emotion in his voice. He speaks so softly. It's just outstanding. Yes, he comes out and labels Australia Day Invasion Day. And I can't understand why people can't see why he's done that. Yeah. I get the feeling why he's done that is because for him, Indigenous Australians were the first person here in Australia. White men came after, so to him, white men have invaded them.
But that date, that's when we got invaded. So, look, I agree with him to a certain extent. And what's the difference with them just changing the date? Why don't they change it to Federation Day when it became all states or one Commonwealth? Why don't they do that? Is that a hard question to ask, or I don't reckon it's that hard because you know why? You know what's going to happen, brother? It's going to raise its ugly head every 26th of January. Every 26th of January, it's going to raise its ugly head, and we're all going to talk about it. Whereas if they just change the date to the Commonwealth or the Federation, what's the issue? Everyone's happy. You know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe I'm too passionate about it. I don't know. You know. I don't know.
And that institutional change can come in Western Australia. They changed what was Foundation Day to WA Day. Now I know that's a simple naming, yeah, but in terms of, I suppose, changing the discussion around these particular dates, as Gilbert is talking,
that's when Western Australia was defined, wasn't it?
Sorry, mate.
Is that when WA was defined?
Well,
as a state.
Well, it kind of is, but it changes. It changed instead of it being sort of Foundation Day, like it was founded, like it was just founded by these bunch of white fellas who were just cruising up the coast. They've actually changed it around, and there's been a bit of resistance to that by the usual quarters, but it is possible to make those institutional changes, but it needs people in order to do that. And I know through talking with a number of black fellas about what that represents. They basically stay at home and, it's not a good day. It's like, it's not a good day for them at all. So I think it's interesting.
And what this young fella just said, Australia Day, it's Goodsey said that because he wants to change. And you know what they call him? Oh, he's a radical. He's a radical because he's trying to change the date of Australia Day. What's so radical about that?
It's paradoxical because Australia Day's meaning is for New South Wales. It has meaning there. What's its significance for Victoria? What's its significance for WA?
Good point.
And Adam Goods, he also said when he was accepting his award that whatever the day means to you. So he was really trying to be a statesman and polite and all of that, but I was pleased that he made his views
when you're an
clear
Aboriginal,
enough.
Sometimes with your comments, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah.
Believe me, I know.
Yes, yeah. Yes, down the back.
Sorry. On this topic of the Australian Day, once Morgan Freeman was asked about the month of the racism, and he said something like, we should not mention racism. Mentioning racism, just the racism only gonna end when we stop mentioning it. Because I sometimes I get offended because I'm Brazilian. And sometimes I get offended with complimentary prejudice. Oh, because all Brazilians are hot. I personally know lots of not hot Brazilians. They are actually not hot.
Have you got any sisters?
That was my next question too.
Sorry.
Sometimes people think that because they are doing a compliment is not racist, and I just go I just would like to know the opinion of the board on shall we mention or shall we not mention? Does that help? Does that not help? What you guys think about that?
Well, I think talking about these things is really important, as this incident shows, as we're showing here tonight. But I think the idea of what you call complementary racism is really important, isn't it? Because we see that if we talk about football, all right, particular innate genetic advantages, supposed genetic advantages, so we can talk about, Barry Judd talks about enlightened racism. We see that in the AFL. We talk about black magic, etc. Right? As good as individual players are, I'm not selling anyone out here, but that's a type of this complementary racism, and we have to be careful with that because what we're doing is keeping the idea of race alive.
Sean, are you nodding?
No, it's just in relation to what I said earlier on with regards to stereotypes. All Brazilians are hot. Women drivers, so on and so forth. It's not until but it's hard because we can't step outside of language. We can't step outside of culture, Not even Doctor Who can do that, I don't think. But the point I'm trying to make is that these things are there and we've got to try and deal with them. We can't just simply say, well, let's just not mention racism and it'll go away. Well, I don't know.
You'll never stamp out racism. Racism is always going to be there. It's never going to go away because people, that's just the way they are.
But what has changed at the footy is that the people in the crowd will now expose a racist.
I like that.
And that hasn't always been there. So that's been a good thing. Yeah. Another question?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Ella, and just on your point, Angela, about education. So I'm a new teacher. I started about halfway through last year, and I'm working with a new Australian curriculum. I just wanted to comment on Gary's point that teachers are doing a fine job. I think that some teachers are, but I think there's a massive gap in education of teachers. So as part of the Australian curriculum, we do now have to, in all subjects, have to include cultural awareness of Indigenous people, but also other cultures around the world. And I know a lot of teachers who are really struggling to incorporate particularly Indigenous stuff into their curriculum. And I think partly it's about personal, I think it's a generational thing that we weren't taught history that well in school. Like, a lot of history just started at 1788. And, even I had a really progressive history teacher who actually was really interested in Indigenous history, so we learnt a bit. But as a teacher, I feel like there's a huge gap in my knowledge. And I guess it's really... So particularly to racism... I think where does that fit into the Australian curriculum? You can't have a subject that's Australian, that's racist. I really like the idea of sport because I think a lot of people, especially young boys and girls now, really connect with that, and it's a common ground. It doesn't have to be racist at schools, but... Yeah. Sorry, it's not a question. I do have a question. I guess how can we make teachers feel more comfortable to incorporate things like racism and Indigenous perspectives into the curriculum? Yeah. Sorry.
Most schools have got Aboriginal education workers. And I know when you do Koori Week, or they call it Aboriginal Week, NAIDOC Week, that's right. So I think there's education in there, but look, I agree with you. I'd rather see a curriculum where it's a national body, not just a state body, it's a Commonwealth, where I don't know how they're going to teach it because I don't know how you're going to do it in timelines, 1788, 67, do you do it in timelines, or do I go back to my point before where how do we teach non-Aboriginal people about our culture and we can't talk about it? So I reckon it falls back to what I said before. You can't sort of tell everyone everything.
Surely it should be a compulsory subject.
Well,
I would have thought.
I can only speak from a West Australian perspective, and it is taught particularly in junior school and like what we used to call social studies, which is what now society and the environment or whatever it is. But they do teach modules in terms of that. But just as a personal experience, my wife's a teacher at a high school in Perth, and government school, and she came home one day and she had all these NAIDOC posters all rolled up and put them on the bench, and I went, What are you doing with them? And she goes, you'll never guess what her head of department did. And I said, well, what did he do? And she goes, well, these are in the bin. So this is a head of department. So this is what we'll talk about, institutional change and how personal responsibility plays such an important role in that. So here's someone who's in charge of, the curriculum within a school, who's basically gone, this means nothing to me, I'm going to bin it. Now, if you have that at a principal level, it changes the holistic nature of the ways that things get learnt and done, and general engagement with local Indigenous people and those sorts of things. If it's at a departmental level, changes again. If it's at a government level with a minister or a senator or whatever, it changes it all again. So it's trying to, I suppose, have those discussions with people who can affect change. And so when situations like that do occur, that he gets a kick up the bum for doing something that he should not have done in the first place. And by that I mean the guy putting the NAIDOC posters in the bin.
Can I add something
Yes.
Is that all right?
Yes.
My name's Barbara Jennings, work for the Australian Education Union, so I can't sit here without feeling I have to say something. There's a member, good on you. So, teacher unions and a lot of other progressive people have worked incredibly hard to make sure that the curriculum includes human rights, as you say, SOS, as you were saying, Sean. It's right through the curriculum, respectful relationships, and I think teachers are one of the strongest groups that really help educate young people in that area, and that's of course why Tony Abbott is so keen to kill off and change the national curriculum, and why he's got Kevin Donnelly, who was Jeff Kennett's advisor, setting the new curriculum. And if you think things are bad now, you wait till the whole black armband view of history's gone, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, no, it's a comment.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one more question before we wrap up.
Can I just add to that? There's
okay,
there's a really good story in the book. So Wayne Ludby, the photographer for the Sunday Age, talked about how he came to an awareness of racism in sport, and it was his high school teacher who himself had been inspired by Henry Reynolds' early work, right? And you know, he was one of the few teachers at the time who was teaching kids. So we're talking in the 70s. About these issues, and he was a very influential teacher who made a huge difference to this student and to Nick Place and to a few others, which contributed to this story. You know, so the place of teachers is very important. And I'd just add, if you're looking for something in terms of teaching, make sure you include Indigenous voices. You know, students will listen to the real thing rather than being taught at, and find something creative. You know, sport is a great way into these issues. Right? It's something that appeals to students. Many students are interested. It's a great avenue for getting to the nub of some of these issues.
It disarms people. It's a trick, if you like. And I use that quite deliberately. You know, it is a trick in order to sort of, okay, because if I say I'm going to have a lecture on the stolen generations, I can be guaranteed I'm going to get probably one or two people there. If I say I'm going to give a lecture on Pastor Doug Nicholls and Sid Jackson, the great Carlton champion, I'm going to get a few more people there. But it's basically going to be the same lecture. Yeah, so that's what it does. Sport disarms people, so they go in there. It's like music, it's like food. Yeah, it fits into that same sort of thing. People can participate in it because they've got a starting point where they can move through it.
Aboriginal people get accepted and get respect through sport. I know that because I've been down that track.
Power of sport. We have to wrap up, I'm afraid. We've gone over time. I know you're saying little question. Is it a little question?
Probably a comment
okay.
About teachers. I have a daughter who teaches in the Northern Territory and is very passionate about everything that's being discussed. But what... I know about teachers and I love the passion they have, but what about coming from the home?
Well, yes.
It's a huge issue.
I hear you. We do have to wrap up. Thank you so much for supporting this topic. It's a lively one. There's a lot to discuss. Thankfully, Gary has agreed to stay around and sign a few copies of his book. Matthew couldn't be here tonight, but Gary is going to do the work of two men. Thank you very much, Gary Osmond, Sean Gorman, and Gilbert McAdam, who really... Yes! Gilbert should be going to schools and talking to the young kids. That would fill that hole you were talking about in teaching.
I did that for 10 years. I don't want to do that anymore.
Oh, okay. I should have checked with you first. Thank you very much. We'll see you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Well done, boys.